What would you do if, at your own son's wedding, your brand new daughter-in-law stood up and announced, right in front of everyone, that she's decided where you'll be living from now on? I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this family drama unfolded, because the real shocker was still to come. Weddings are supposed to be magical, aren't they? The flowers, the music, the happy tears. And if you're lucky, a slice of cake that doesn't taste like cardboard. I'd spent the whole morning floating on a cloud of nostalgia, watching my only son, Sawyer, tie the knot with his beautiful bride, Harper. I'll admit, I was feeling a little bit of everything: pride, joy, and, if I'm being honest, a touch of relief that my grocery bill might finally shrink now that Sawyer was officially someone else's responsibility. I'd even worn my favorite blue dress, the one that makes me feel 10 years younger, and I'd managed to keep my mascara from running during the ceremony. All in all, I was feeling pretty good about myself. The reception was in full swing. The band was playing, at last, and I was just about to take my first real sip of champagne when I heard the telltale clink of a glass. You know the sound, the universal signal that someone is about to make a speech and you'd better pay attention. I turned to see Harper, my brand new daughter-in-law, standing up at the head table, her eyes sparkling with excitement and maybe a little mischief. She looked radiant, I'll give her that, and I braced myself for a sweet toast, or maybe a funny story about Sawyer's childhood. Instead, she raised her glass, smiled at the crowd, and said, "As your new wife, I permit your mother to live in my old apartment. Permit me, permit me." For a split second, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she meant to say, invite or welcome. But no, she said, permit, as if she were the Queen of England handing out royal favors. I nearly choked on my champagne, and I could feel a few heads turning in my direction, waiting to see how I'd react. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and did what any self-respecting mother would do. I smiled, trying to keep it classy, and said, "I appreciate that, dear, but I live very happily on my estate." I even added a little wink for good measure. Now, when I say state, I don't mean a sprawling mansion with a butler and a tennis court. My state is a cozy little house on the edge of town, with a garden I've poured my heart into and a stubborn old cat named Captain who thinks he owns the place. But in that moment, I figured a little exaggeration wouldn't hurt. After all, if Harper was going to hand out living arrangements like party favors, I might as well play along. I was just about to take another sip, because let's be honest, sometimes you need a little bubbly to get through these family gatherings, when Sawyer, my sweet, sometimes clueless son, piped up from across the table. "Mom, I decided not to tell you earlier, but my in-laws and Peyton are moving in there." I blinked. Once, twice. I looked at Sawyer, then at Harper, then back at Sawyer. Was this some kind of elaborate wedding prank? Had I just been evicted from an apartment I didn't even live in? I could feel the room getting quieter, the way it does when everyone senses drama brewing, but doesn't want to miss a single word. I glanced around, half expecting to see a hidden camera or Ashton Kutcher jumping out to yell, "You've been punked." But no, this was real. My son, my flesh and blood, had just announced, at his own wedding, no less, that his new in-laws and their daughter were moving into Harper's old apartment. The same apartment that, apparently, I was being permitted to live in. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. Is this what they mean by modern family? Because if so, I must have missed the memo. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd throw a fit or burst into tears. But I've been around the block a few times, and I know better than to let a little family drama ruin a good party. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of champagne, and said, "Well, I hope they like the leaky faucet and the neighbor who practices tuba at midnight." A few people chuckled, and I caught Sawyer's eye. He looked both relieved and a little sheepish. But inside, I was reeling. I mean, really, who makes these kinds of announcements at a wedding? Was this some new tradition I hadn't heard about? Surprise your mother-in-law with a housing update between the salad and the main course. I glanced over at Harper, who was beaming, clearly pleased with herself. I had to admit, she had guts. Not everyone would stand up in front of 100 people and declare their mother-in-law's living situation like it was the weather report. As the evening wore on, I found myself replaying the moment in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was this Harper's way of welcoming me into the family, or was she drawing a line in the sand? And what about Sawyer? Had he really not thought to mention this little arrangement before the wedding? I couldn't help but wonder what else he'd forgotten to tell me. Was I going to find out at Christmas that they'd turned my garden into a parking lot? But then, As I watched Sawyer and Harper dancing their first dance, I felt a wave of something unexpected: excitement. Sure, the announcement had caught me off guard, and yes, I was a little annoyed at being treated like a chess piece in someone else's game. But I also knew that life is full of surprises, and sometimes the best stories come from the moments you least expect. Besides, if Harper thought she could outmaneuver me, she had another thing coming. I didn't raise a son, survive PTA meetings, and keep a garden alive for 20 years just to be sidelined by a wedding toast. So, I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to let this little announcement ruin my night. I was going to enjoy the music, eat too much cake, and maybe even drag Sawyer onto the dance floor for a mother-son boogie. And as for the apartment, well, let's just say I had a few ideas of my own about who would be living where, and I wasn't about to let anyone permit me to do anything I didn't want to do. After all, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't control what other people say or do, but you can always control how you respond. And tonight I was choosing to respond with grace, humor, and maybe just a hint of mischief. Because if this was the start of my new life as a mother-in-law, I was going to make sure it was a story worth telling. As the laughter from my little quip about the leaky faucet and the tuba playing neighbor faded, I took a moment to scan the room. It was one of those slow motion moments, you know. The kind where you suddenly feel like you're the only one in the room who doesn't know the punchline to the joke. I looked around the hall, no sign of Greg and Leela, no sign of Peyton. Just me, Sawyer, and a sea of faces doing their best impressions of people who weren't eavesdropping, even though I could practically feel their ears stretching in my direction. I could see Aunt Marlene pretending to fuss with her napkin, and my neighbor Carol, who'd somehow snagged an invite, was craning her neck so far I thought she might topple right out of her chair. I had to stifle a laugh. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family drama is the best entertainment at any wedding, and tonight, apparently, I was the main act. But as the initial shock wore off, a strange mix of emotions started bubbling up inside me. On the surface I was still smiling, still playing the part of the gracious mother of the groom, but underneath, I felt a little pang, a sharp, unexpected ache that I hadn't anticipated. Was I being pushed out? Was this some elaborate way of telling me that my role in Sawyer's life was being downsized, like an old sofa that doesn't fit the new decor? I tried to shake it off, but the thought lingered, stubborn as a dandelion in my garden. I watched Sawyer and Harper as they mingled with guests, their faces glowing with that new-laid shine. They looked so happy, so wrapped up in each other, and for a moment I felt a wave of pride. I'd raised a good man and he'd found someone who clearly adored him. But then, just as quickly, the fear crept back in. Was there room for me in this new chapter of his life? Or was I destined to become one of those mothers-in-law you only see at holidays, sitting quietly in the corner, clutching a glass of wine and reminiscing about the good old days? I glanced at my empty champagne glass and considered a refill. Maybe two. But before I could make my escape to the bar, Sawyer reappeared at my side looking sheepish. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. I just didn't realize I was getting a new address tonight. Next time maybe send me a postcard first." He chuckled, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. Harper just wanted everyone to feel included. Her family needed a place, and we thought it would be nice if you were nearby." Nearby. That word hung in the air like a balloon about to pop. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being shuffled around like a piece on a chessboard, my future decided by other people's plans. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was no stranger to change. I'd survived Sawyer's teenage years after all. I'd weathered job changes, heartbreaks, and the loss of loved ones. I could handle a little family reshuffling. Still, as I watched the party swirl around me, I couldn't help but wonder, was this how it started? Was this the moment when mothers became afterthoughts, their opinions politely ignored, their needs quietly set aside? I thought about my own mother, how she'd always seemed so strong, so unflappable, even as the world changed around her. Had she felt this way too? Had she ever sat at a family gathering, smiling on the outside while her heart ached on the inside? I shook my head, trying to banish the gloomy thoughts. This was supposed to be a celebration, not a pity party. Besides, if Sawyer and Harper thought they could sideline me, they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't about to fade quietly into the background. If they wanted to play games, they'd pick the wrong mother-in-law. I straightened my shoulders and decided to do what I do best: observe, listen, and gather information. If Harper's family was moving into her old apartment, I wanted to know why. Was it a temporary arrangement, or were they planning to put down roots? And what did it mean for Sawyer and Harper's future? Were they planning to move in together somewhere else? Or was this just the first step in a much bigger plan? As I pondered these questions, I noticed Leela and Greg finally reappearing near the dessert table, their arms linked with Peyton's. They looked a little flustered, as if they'd just come from a secret meeting. I watched as they chatted with guests, their smiles a little too bright, their laughter a little too forced. Something was definitely up. I made my way over, determined to get some answers. Leela, lovely to see you, I said, my voice as sweet as the lemon bars on the table. I hear you'll be moving into Harper's old place. I hope you like the neighborhood. The tuba player next door is quite the character. Leela laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Oh yes, well it's just for a little while. We're in between houses, you know how it is. Harper thought it would be nice for us all to be close. I nodded, filing that information away for later. Of course, family is everything, isn't it? As I walked back to my table, I felt a strange sense of excitement bubbling up beneath the worry. Maybe this was my chance to shake things up, to remind everyone that I wasn't just Sawyer's mother. I was a force to be reckoned with. If they wanted to play house, I could play right along. After all, I'd spent years managing a household, juggling work and family, and keeping everyone fed and clothed. I knew how to handle a little chaos. I glanced at Sawyer, who was now deep in conversation with Harper, and felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty dictate my next move. If anything, this was an opportunity, a chance to redefine my role, to carve out a new space for myself in this ever-changing family dynamic. Maybe I'd even make a few new friends along the way. Who knows? Stranger things have happened. As the night wore on and the music grew louder, I found myself laughing more easily, the earlier tension melting away. I danced with old friends, shared stories with new ones, and even managed to snag an extra slice of cake. By the time the party wound down, I felt lighter, freer, and maybe even a little bit excited about what the future might hold. Because here's the thing, ladies' life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes you get thrown a curveball, and you have to decide whether to duck or swing for the fences. Tonight, I decided to swing, and as I left the hall arm in arm with Sawyer, I knew one thing for sure: this story was far from over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. By the time the cake had been cut, and the last of the toasts had fizzled out, I was feeling a little more relaxed, thanks in no small part to a second glass of wine, and the realization that, no matter what, I still had my sense of humor. The band was winding down, guests were starting to gather their coats, and the newlyweds were off somewhere taking photos with a sparkler arch. I took a moment to slip away from the crowd, my heels clicking softly on the polished hallway floor, and found Sawyer standing by himself, fiddling with his tie and looking like a man who'd just realized he'd forgotten to pay the electric bill. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and gave him my best mom look. The one that says, "I love you, but you're not getting away with this." He glanced up, caught my eye, and gave me a sheepish grin. For a moment I was transported back to when he was 8 years old, caught red-handed with a frog in his pocket and mud on his shoes. "Some things never change, honey," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "I love you. But next time you make a real estate deal with my name on it, give me a heads up. I might want to negotiate the rent." I tried to keep it playful, but there was a kernel of truth in my words. I'd spent my whole life making sure Sawyer had a roof over his head, and now here he was, shuffling me around like a chess piece at his own wedding. He laughed, but I could see the nerves flickering behind his eyes. "Mom, I just wanted everyone to get along. Harper's family needed a place, and I thought it would be easier if we all stayed close. I didn't mean to spring it on you like that." I reached out and squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his fingers. "We will, sweetheart. But remember, this old gal isn't going anywhere. And if your in-laws need help with the tuba, I know a guy." I winked, and he let out a genuine laugh, the tension easing from his shoulders. "It's funny, isn't it? No matter how old our kids get, they still need a little reminder now, and then that we're not just background characters in their lives. We're the ones who taught them how to tie their shoes, how to stand up for themselves, how to laugh when things get tough. And sometimes, we have to remind them that we're still the queens of our own castles, even if the castle has a leaky faucet and a cat who thinks he's the king." Sawyer looked at me, his expression softening. "I know, Mom. I want everyone to be happy. I want you to feel included." I smiled, feeling a wave of affection for this grown man who still, in so many ways, was my little boy. I am happy, Sawyer, and I am included, but you have to trust me to find my own place in all of this. I don't need anyone to permit me to live anywhere. I've built a life I love, and I'm not about to let anyone, no matter how well-intentioned, rearrange it without my say-so. He nodded, looking a little chastened. You're right. I should have talked to you first. I just got caught up in everything with the wedding and Harper's family, and I didn't want to add any more stress. I squeezed his hand again, this time a little tighter. Life is always going to be stressful, Sawyer. The trick is learning how to roll with it, and how to laugh at it when you can. Besides, if I survived your teenage years, I can survive anything. He grinned, and for a moment, we just stood there in comfortable silence, the noise of the party fading into the background. I thought about all the times I'd worried about Sawyer, when he was sick, when he struggled in school, when he moved out for college, and I spent weeks staring at his empty room. I realized that, in some ways, this was just another one of those moments. A new chapter, a new set of challenges, but the same unbreakable bond between mother and son. After a while, Sawyer cleared his throat. So, what do you think of Harper's family moving into her old apartment? I shrugged, a smile tugging at my lips. I think it'll be interesting, that's for sure. But I also think they're lucky to have you and Harper looking out for them. And who knows? Maybe I'll finally get to meet this mysterious tuba player everyone keeps talking about. He laughed, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. You're the best, Mom. I patted his cheek, just like I used to when he was little. Don't you forget it. As we made our way back to the reception, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fear and uncertainty that had gnawed at me earlier were still there, but they'd been joined by something stronger, confidence. I knew who I was, and I knew my place in Sawyer's life. No wedding announcement or housing shuffle could change that. Back in the main hall, the party was winding down. Guests were hugging goodbye. The band was packing up, and the last of the champagne was being poured. I caught Harper's eye across the room, and she gave me a tentative smile. I smiled back, letting her know that, despite everything, we were going to be just fine. As I gathered my things and prepared to head home, I thought about all the changes that lay ahead. There would be new routines, new faces, and probably a few more surprises along the way. But I was ready. I'd faced bigger challenges before, and I'd come out stronger every time. Sometimes you have to remind your kids, and yourself, that you're still the queen of your own castle. Even if the castle has a leaky faucet, a stubborn cat, and a neighbor who plays the tuba at all hours. Because at the end of the day, it's not about where you live or who lives near you. It's about the love you share, the memories you make, and the laughter that carries you through the tough times. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I knew one thing for sure: this story was far from over. In fact, the best chapters were still to come. By the time the last notes of Sweet Caroline faded and the twinkle lights in the reception hall began to dim, I was more than ready to slip off my shoes and call it a night. My feet ached. My cheeks hurt from smiling, and my mind was still spinning from the day's unexpected twists. But as I gathered my things and prepared to say my goodbyes, I noticed a small commotion near the back of the hall. There, emerging from a side corridor, were Harper's parents, Greg and Leela, and her younger sister, Peyton, looking a little disheveled and more than a little sheepish. I couldn't help but chuckle. After all the drama about apartments and living arrangements, it turned out the in-laws had simply gotten lost looking for the bathroom. The sight of them, blinking in the bright lights, and apologizing to anyone who would listen, was almost too much. I caught Sawyer's eye across the room, and we both burst out laughing. The tension that had hung over the evening like a stubborn rain cloud seemed to dissolve in an instant. Leela, fanning herself with a cocktail napkin, explained, "We must have taken a wrong turn after the cake. I thought I heard running water, but it was just the kitchen sink." Greg, red faced but grinning, added, "We found the coat closet, the janitor's supply room, and what I think was a broom cupboard, but not a single bathroom." Even Peyton, who had spent most of the evening glued to her phone, managed a sheepish smile. I couldn't resist. "Well, at least you got a tour of the place!" "Next time I'll put up signs, or maybe just hand out a map at the door." The whole group erupted in laughter, and for the first time all night, I felt the last of my worries slip away. It was such a simple, silly thing, but it reminded me that, at the end of the day, we're all just people, flawed, forgetful, and sometimes hilariously lost in unfamiliar territory. As the guests began to trickle out, I found myself standing with Leela by the dessert table, both of us eyeing the last lonely slice of wedding cake. She nudged it toward me. You take it, she said. You've earned it tonight. I grinned and split it in half, handing her a fork. Let's share. After all, we're practically roommates now, right? She laughed, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of real warmth in her eyes. Maybe this whole blended family thing wouldn't be so bad after all. We chatted for a while, swapping stories about our kids and commiserating over the challenges of being mothers-in-law. You know, Lila said, I was so nervous about tonight. I kept worrying that I'd say the wrong thing or step on someone's toes. But you just roll with it. I wish I had your sense of humor. I smiled, feeling a little proud. Oh, trust me, it's taken years of practice and a lot of deep breaths. But I've learned that if you can laugh at yourself, nothing else seems quite so scary. As the hall emptied out, Sawyer and Harper came over to say their goodbyes. Sawyer hugged me tight, whispering, "Thanks for being such a good sport, Mom." Harper, looking a little less like the queen of the castle and a little more like the girl I'd first met over coffee, squeezed my hand. "I hope you know how much we appreciate you. I'm sorry if I overstepped earlier." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a rival or a usurper, but a young woman trying her best to build a bridge between two families. "It's all water under the bridge," I said. "Just promise me one thing. Next time you want to make a big announcement, give me a heads up. I might want to practice my surprised face in the mirror first." She laughed, and I knew we'd be just fine. As I gathered my things and headed for the door, I made a mental note to label the doors at the next family gathering. Maybe even color code them. Or better yet, just host the next party at my place, where at least I know where the bathroom is. I glanced back at the hall one last time, watching as the staff cleared away the last of the dishes and the band packed up their instruments. It struck me how quickly things can change, how a single evening can turn your world upside down, and then right itself again, all before midnight. Driving home, I thought about the day's events, the surprise announcement, the awkward conversations, the laughter, and the little moments of connection that made it all worthwhile. I realized that, for all my worries about being pushed out or forgotten, I was still very much a part of Sawyer's life. Maybe my role was changing, but that didn't mean I was any less important. If anything, it meant I had a chance to reinvent myself, to find new ways to connect and support my family, and maybe even to make a few new friends along the way. I pulled into my driveway, the porch light casting a warm glow over my little state. My old cat, Captain, was waiting by the door, tail twitching impatiently. I scooped him up and carried him inside, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. My house might not be a palace, but it was mine, leaky faucet, stubborn cat, and all. And as I set my purse down and kicked off my shoes, I realized that I wouldn't trade it for anything. So, what's the moral of the story? Never underestimate a mother-in-law with a sense of humor, and always keep a spare key to your own place! Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it, but if you can laugh, adapt, and keep your heart open, you'll find your way through. Family isn't about who lives where or who makes the announcements. It's about showing up, rolling with the punches, and loving each other through the chaos. As I settled into my favorite chair, a cup of tea in hand and Captain purring at my feet, I thought about the next family gathering. Maybe I'd bake an extra cake, just in case. Maybe I'd print out a few maps. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd let someone else get lost for a change. After all, life is a lot more fun when you don't always know what's around the next corner. And if you've enjoyed this little adventure, don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the front lines of family life. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that the best stories are the ones we share, leaky faucets, tuba players and all.